and welcome to our webcast for January 17, 2020, or 2020. Okay, my name is Christian Debré, and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet.
Hi there.
Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. We believe that the choice to die is not free as long as old, ill, and disabled people don't have the free choice to where and how they live, and that must change.
Yes.
Okay, today's topics. We have two. Quebec panel recommended euthanasia by advance request. And the second one is federal consultation to modify MAiD law. So Amy will help us through those subjects.
At least I hope I will. Okay, so Quebec panel recommends euthanasia by advanced request. Welcome to our first webcast of 2020. Woohoo! For the next couple of weeks, we're looking at a report written for Quebec's Ministry of Health and Social Services on the possibility of allowing advance requests for euthanasia for people who are unable to consent. This report is important because it is part of the evidence used by the federal government to justify expanding eligibility for medical assistance in dying, or MAiD, to people who cannot consent when euthanasia is given. So right now, when you have to be able to consent at the time that they euthanize you, you have to be
which is a very weak protection, but
right.
At least it's a protection.
Right, and they're saying they want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
As with the Council of Canadian Academies reports published in December of 2018, and you can see our webcasts for January 11th, January 18th, February 1st, and February 8th of 2019, it does not appear that any people with disabilities were included in the panel who wrote this Quebec report, nor did it reflect a disability perspective. Quelle surprise.
So what's happened? Nothing for us without us doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really typical of policy that's made about people with disabilities. It doesn't include disabled people making the policy, and this is typical.
Yeah.
So this creates flaws in the report. For example,
okay.
Language used to describe disability is biased and evokes images of tragedy and pity. The report refers to some disabled people as bedbound, and actually a more literal translation of the French phrase is nailed to their beds. Prisoners of their bodies and without hope of a cure. Such language gives the lie to the panel's claim on page 21 that they have no preconceived ideas of what constitutes a good
What's
life.
A gag? Okay.
Yeah, right. This report involves a complete failure of imagination. They think that somebody with a disability, especially somebody whose tastes change radically after acquiring one, can't possibly be happy that way. They do a thought experiment involving a woman with dementia who enjoys peanut butter sandwiches after a lifetime of fine dining and now paints simple pictures after producing breathtaking artwork. If most of the world doesn't consider it age appropriate or classy, so what? She likes it, leave her be. But they were recommending that a woman in that situation maybe should be euthanized.
Right. If her present self decides that her future self wouldn't want to live that way, then she should die, regardless of how well she adjusts. The lack of a disability rights perspective also means that the report does not take into account the effects of social policy on disabled people's life choices. The panel talks about the values that guided their reflection, such as dignity, liberty, and autonomy.
Nice value.
Right, nice values, and celebrates Quebec as a free and democratic society.
Most of the time.
Sort of.
Not all.
Sort of. Yet they fail to mention that disabled people are often forced into institutions for lack of home-based services.
Oops.
Yeah. Oh, little oversight there. The report cites the law on health and social services, which says that services must be provided in a way that respects the dignity and autonomy of the person. But there is no mention of community integration, nor the pending lawsuit against the province's health ministry over inhumane conditions in nursing homes. Oops. Oh, minor oversight.
Yeah.
The authors propose changes to the eligibility criterion related to suffering. Under the current law, the person must experience constant and unbearable physical or psychological suffering, which cannot be relieved in a manner the person finds tolerable. The panel proposes that the person must have physical, psychological, or existential suffering that is significant and difficult to relieve.
Oops.
Oh.
If it's difficult, don't do it. So a math exam at your school, don't do it, it's difficult.
The word existential is new. And of course, acquiring a disability would cause you to look at the meaning of your life. People often put their whole identity into their work, their hobbies, or some ability, like one of the philosophers quoted in the paper suggests. And if you lose that one big thing, you're in big trouble. Where's the peer support to help with such a huge adjustment?
Right, exactly. And of course, the people who are writing this are all doctors, academics. And so for them, they're probably scared out of their minds that this might happen to them. And I can understand being afraid, but really it's not that bad. Come on, people. Learn to live in the moment.
Yeah.
Also propose new wording for the end of life eligibility criteria, which is supposed to clear up any confusion. Under the current statute, the person must be at the end of life. That's confusing.
Yeah.
The panel proposes that the person must be, quote, on a trajectory toward the end of life for which the doctor can reasonably foresee their death.
So there is a good gag about that.
Yeah. So the panel justifies the changes by saying that suffering from dementia is different from what happens with cancer, and that they're trying to clarify what end of life means. But that doesn't explain why they have also made the standards more relaxed. So they've changed it from unbearable suffering to significant suffering, from cannot be relieved by a means the person finds tolerable to difficult to relieve, not the same thing, and from at the end of life to on a trajectory toward the end of life for which a doctor can reasonably foresee their death. After all, why use 5 words when 17 will
Yes,
do?
why not?
And what would they do with that
Why
last?
do hard when you could do hard? Yeah.
The expert group described 5 situations in which people may be unable to consent to euthanasia. First, they have a condition that causes cognitive abilities to decline, like Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease. They have a sudden brain injury, such as a stroke, aneurysm, or head injury, causing a coma or other changes in consciousness. The person has never been competent to consent to medical care and thus is unable to consent to euthanasia, such as a person with an intellectual disability, a severe intellectual disability, I should say. The person has a mental illness that impairs their ability to make logical judgments about their situation, or the person loses capacity because of secondary effects of their illness or medication. So those are the 5 situations that they say are applicable to advance requests. The panel doesn't address the difference between the ability to consent to health care versus consenting to a life-ending procedure.
Not exactly the same thing.
No. Healthcare usually reestablishes health. Life-ending procedure doesn't. Nor do the authors deal with the barriers to consent caused by discrimination or other factors, such as lack of communication access, learned helplessness and compliance, lack of stimulation leading to cognitive deficits, or poor education causing an inability to read.
That's more often.
That's very frequent, especially for people who are raised who grew up with a disability. An unmet need for supported decision making. So person, they basically give them a guardian rather than helping the person make their own decisions. Professionals' use of jargon. Doctors talking like doctors instead of like people. And negative judgments about a disabled person's quality of life that limit the options that are offered to the person. So the doctor says, well, you can't really, your life is over, so why bother, Why bother trying rehabilitation? In its description of capacity to consent to care, the report mentions the work of Thomas Grisso and Paul Applebaum as the standard in the field, but they fail to list the Applebaum criteria. These are 4 cognitive abilities needed to make medical decisions. They include being able to understand information, apply the information to one's own situation, weigh the benefits and risks and arrive at a decision, and express one's choice. And the authors state that this is not the test used in Quebec. Oh.
Oops. That's the standard. Well, we don't use it.
Right.
Okay.
It's the gold standard, but we don't use it. Instead, the courts in the province look at whether the person understands the nature of their illness, whether the person understands the nature and goal of the treatment, whether the person understands the risks associated with the treatment, whether the person understands the risks of not receiving the treatment.
Understand.
Yeah. And whether the ability to consent is impaired by their illness. So the Applebaum criteria talk about 4 skills that are necessary to make a decision, but the standard used by Quebec is just a bunch of information that the person hopefully understands.
Basic understanding, not the process of how do we decision.
How do they make the decision?
Yeah. Okay. Quite a lot different.
And there's a difference between saying, I understand this thing and how it works versus understanding this is the effect it might have on my life.
Right, exactly. That's applying it to your own life and weighing the thing, no, they're not even touching this.
No.
The experts refer to some precedents from the US, including the Cruzan case and the Patient's Bill of Rights, which established that a person may refuse treatment. But the authors skip over the US Supreme Court cases that found that there is no constitutional right to assisted suicide. Cherry picking, that's called. Cherry picking. Picking the information you want because it agrees with you and leaving out the stuff that you don't like. And yes, we do that too. Sorry. Chapter 5 focuses on the philosophical question summed up by Maxime Couture of Living with Dignity. Should the present self be allowed to force the future self to commit suicide? That's a great summary of the question. Yeah. Though the argument presented in the report suggests that the answer should be no, the panel recommends allowing advance requests for euthanasia anyway.
Okay. You should do that. No.
Go ahead, Taylor.
And they even go so far as to say that if you acquire a cognitive impairment, or you even let time pass by, let a few years go by, you should be treated as a completely different person.
Yeah. Great. The authors dismiss the possibility that people could adjust to the disability of dementia. And that's when people adjust to disability, nobody expects it. So it's called a paradox. And they say that the process depends on a person's ability to have relationships. And since the mental decline of dementia makes it a person unable to maintain relationships, then they can't adjust, which to me seems a little misplaced, because it seems like the capacity that you gain when you get dementia is the ability to live in the moment. And all those, new age people are wanting to do that. So it seems like it's a shortcut.
Bizarre.
It's a shortcut.
Yeah.
The panel also feels obliged to point out that there is disagreement in the disability community over these issues, without recognizing that disability rights groups oppose assisted suicide and euthanasia based on policy concerns, while disabled individuals usually support MAiD for personal reasons.
Without proof most of the time.
Yeah. Like the Council of Canadian Academies reports on advance requests, this document includes the kind of problems, fact, logic, and consistency that result from excluding the disability rights perspective on an issue that is, at heart, a disability rights issue. It affects disabled people. So next week, we will focus on the specific recommendations offered in the report. And they're proposing, they're trying, they're really trying, but they've hampered themselves by excluding an understanding of disability. So their proposals are a little strange. Okay, the federal consultation to modify the MAiD law. This week, the Canadian government opened a public consultation on potential modifications to the medical assistance in dying law following the Truchon decision. The question in an online survey focused on effectiveness of the current safeguards, ideas for future safeguards, and circumstances under which advance requests should be allowed. So they're really pushing that advance request thing.
Yeah, they're pushing hard.
Some questions have multiple choice answers, while others have short narrative answers. The questions and the framework of the whole project reveal a bias in favor of euthanasia and expanding eligibility, and a poor grasp of disability rights. For example, rather than saying a neutral, more than 6,700 people have chosen medical assistance in dying since 2016.
Which is neutral.
Neutral. Yeah. The review of the MAiD in Canada states that more than 6,700 Canadians who were suffering unbearably chose to die peacefully with the help of a physician or nurse practitioner.
Democratic and very non-aligned.
Yeah. If I had written that, one of my journalism professors would slumped me.
You failed. Ow.
One of the questions euthanasia should supports, rather than ensuring that the person receives the supports they need to avoid forced placement in an institution. Yeah.
Oh yeah, this thing exists, but we're not going to do a thing to help you get it. Right. Here, just know about this thing and then stress out because it's out there and you can't get it.
Right. It would make a lot more sense to, instead of letting people know that community-based services are there, they could let people know that medical assistance in dying is there, but in the meantime, we're going to make you live in your own home with self-directed personal assistance services. That would be cool.
Yeah, very.
We encourage everyone to have their say in the consultation. For more information, visit the website, and we have a link on our text, and the text can be found either on our website or on our Facebook page. Besides the online questionnaire, you will find a PDF version which can be filled in and sent in as an email attachment, or printed, filled out by hand, and mailed in by snail mail. The deadline for submissions is the end of the day on January 27th. And if you want more information about any of the topics that we discuss here, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours-vivant, not dead yet, all one word. Visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christian for helping out, and
Thank
thanks
you,
to
Amy.
Taylor as well. We will see you next time. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.